My teacher called my work bad and my attitude even worse. It then got featured in the biggest art gallery in the country. My hands were shaking when I walked into the gallery. It was crowded, filled with people in fancy clothes, sipping champagne, whispering, pointing, smiling. I couldn't even hear myself think over the buzz of voices and the clinking of glasses. And there it was, my painting, front and center, lit up under the brightest spotlight. The same piece my art teacher had once held up in class and laughed at, saying, "This looks unfinished, amateurish. Honestly, your work is bad, and your attitude, even worse." I can still remember the way everyone stared at me in that moment, the way my face burned, the way I wanted to disappear. And yet, here I was, standing in the biggest art gallery in the country, listening to strangers gush about it, calling it raw and haunting. One woman even said it reminded her of Picasso. And then, my teacher walked in. He froze when he saw me. Then his eyes slid to the painting, wide and disbelieving. I thought for a second he might actually choke on his own pride. And in that instant, I knew. This was going to get very, very messy. But let me back up, because to really understand how I got here, I need to tell you how it all started. It began in my senior year of high school. I had always liked art, not in a I'm going to be the next Van Gogh kind of way, but it was the one place I felt safe. My sketchbook was full of messy, weird ideas. Faces that didn't look right, buildings that bent the wrong way, colors that clashed. I thought that was the point of art, breaking rules. But my teacher, Mr. Roberts, hated that. He loved perfect shading, clean lines, realistic portraits. If your apple didn't look like an apple, he would tear it apart. And if you dared to argue, well, he'd tear you apart. I was stubborn, though. I didn't want to copy photos. I wanted to paint the way things felt, not the way they looked. And that clashed with everything Mr. Roberts stood for. At first, it was small comments, like, "You'd be good if you just applied yourself," or "You're lazy, that's your problem." Then it got crueler. "Your work is bad, and your attitude, even worse." The class laughed sometimes, or they just stayed quiet. I never really knew which was worse. But then came the breaking point, the day he held up my painting, the one that would one day hang in this gallery. Back then it was just acrylic smeared across canvas, dark shapes twisting around each other, a bleeding horizon in the background. It wasn't pretty, but it was mine. Mr. Roberts held it up like a piece of trash. "This," he said, "is what happens when you don't take yourself seriously. Don't bother turning this in. You'll fail." The class went silent. My throat closed up. I wanted to scream, to grab it back, but all I could do was sit there, my nails digging into my palms. That night, I almost threw it away. I had it in my hands, ready to dump it in the trash can, but something inside me said no. Something stubborn, something angry. So, I kept it. And I kept painting, secretly, in my room, even after school ended, even when I told myself I'd grow out of it. I never did. Years passed. Jobs came and went. I worked at a bookstore, a coffee shop, an office where no one remembered my name. But at night, I painted. And then, one random Saturday, my friend dragged me to a tiny local art fair. I didn't want to go, but she insisted I bring a couple of my pieces. Just two, including a one Mr. Roberts had mocked. I almost didn't put it up, but when I did, people stopped. They stared. They asked questions. One woman offered to buy it on the spot. I didn't sell it. Something told me to hold on to it. And that's when it started. Little by little, my work got noticed. A blog featured it, then a small gallery, then a bigger one, until somehow that same bad painting was chosen for the biggest art gallery in the country. And now here I was, staring at Mr. Roberts across the room, watching the blood drain from his face as he realized where he was and what he was looking at. I smiled, just a little, because he didn't know what was coming next. And trust me, it was going to get very, very messy. He didn't move at first. Mr. Roberts just stood there, blinking like he was trying to convince himself it wasn't real. I swear, for a second, I thought he'd turn around and leave before anyone else noticed him. But then someone recognized him. "Oh, Mr. Roberts! Didn't you used to teach at Lincoln High?" a woman near the bar said. She must have been a parent. He gave her a stiff nod, his eyes darting back to me, then to the painting. The woman looked at the canvas, her smile stretching wide. "Isn't this incredible? It's so raw, so emotional. I read in the program that the artist is quite young. Just imagine where their career will go next." Mr. Roberts swallowed hard. His face was tight, his jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might crack. And then he did something I never expected. He walked right over to me. "Congratulations," he said, but his voice was low, flat, almost bitter. He didn't even look at me when he said it. His eyes stayed fixed on the painting, like he was trying to burn a hole through it. "Thanks," I said. My hands were trembling, but I forced myself to stand tall. "Funny, I remember you saying this piece wasn't worth turning in, that it would make me fail." He flinched. Just a flicker, but I saw it. Then he leaned in, his voice a whisper only I could hear. "You think this proves anything? One painting doesn't make you an artist. Don't let this little moment go to your head." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. He was here, in this gallery, surrounded by critics and collectors praising the very piece he once mocked. And still he couldn't admit he was wrong. But the thing is, his words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I tried to brush them off, but I could feel that old sting, the same shame he'd planted in me years ago, rising again. It was like he still had hold on me. I almost let it ruin the night. Almost. But then something happened that flipped the whole room upside down. A man in a sharp gray suit, someone I recognized from an interview in an art magazine, came up to me. He introduced himself as the curator of another major gallery across the country. He said he'd been following my work online for months, waiting to see it in person. This, he said, gesturing to the painting, is exactly the kind of disruptive vision the art world needs right now. I want to offer you a solo exhibition. I froze. My mouth opened, but no words came out. A solo exhibition? Me? I glanced sideways at Mr. Roberts. His face had gone pale, his lips pressed tight. He looked like he might actually be sick. And then in that moment, I realized something. He wasn't just embarrassed. He wasn't just bitter. He was scared. Scared that one of his students, the one he'd written off as lazy, hopeless, bad, was about to soar past anything he'd ever accomplished. The thought almost made me giddy. But then, before I could even process what was happening, someone else chimed in. Another critic. Another gallery owner. They all started circling, talking about commissions, features, opportunities. It was like a feeding frenzy, and I was the center of it. And then Mr. Roberts snapped. He raised his voice over the chatter, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. This is a mistake. You're all being fooled. This work is nothing more than chaos on a canvas. I told her years ago she didn't have what it takes, and I stand by that. The room went silent. Every eye turned to him, then to me, then to the painting. And in that frozen silence, with the whole gallery watching, I realized I had a choice. I could shrink back, let him humiliate me all over again, or I could finally say the one thing I'd been holding back for years. I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, someone else did. And what they said changed everything. It was the gray-suited curator who spoke first. His voice was calm, but carried authority, the kind of tone that made everyone lean in. You told her she didn't have what it takes? He asked Mr. Roberts. He didn't sound angry, just curious, like he was trying to understand. Yes, Mr. Roberts said, his voice sharp. I was her teacher. I saw her so-called work firsthand. It was sloppy, unfocused. She refused to follow structure. She had no discipline, no respect. And this, he jabbed a finger toward my painting, is just proof of what happens when people reward chaos. For a heartbeat, nobody spoke. Then the curator turned to the crowd and said, and yet, isn't that exactly what art is meant to do? Challenge order, push boundaries, break the so-called rules? The room buzzed with whispers. I felt my face heat, my hands trembling at my sides. Half of me wanted to cry from the tension, the other half wanted to laugh, because it felt like the universe was setting up the perfect moment. And then another voice joined in, a woman with fiery red lipstick who I recognized as one of the country's most ruthless art critics. Tell me, Mr. Roberts, she said smoothly, if you truly saw no value in this student's work, then what does it say about your ability as a teacher now that the world is celebrating her vision? That landed like a grenade. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Mr. Roberts' face turned beet red. He stammered something about standards, about how not everyone could be coddled, but his words were drowned by the weight of the question hanging in the air. He looked cornered, and that's when he lashed out. You don't know her like I do, he barked, his voice cracking. She was arrogant, disrespectful. She thought she was above everyone else. I tried to humble her, to teach her discipline, and this, he waved his arm wildly at the crowd, this circus proves I was right. You're all feeding her delusion. The hush that followed was so sharp, I swear I could hear my own heartbeat. Every face in the gallery was turned to me, waiting, judging. And inside me, something snapped. All those years of his voice echoing in my head, all the times I crumpled up sketches because I could already hear him saying they were bad, all the shame he made me carry like a weight tied to my chest. I stepped forward. My voice shook, but I forced the words out. You weren't trying to teach me, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. You were trying to break me. And you almost did. A ripple went through the crowd. I kept going, the words spilling out like they'd been waiting for years. You told me my art was worthless because it didn't look like yours. You told me my attitude was worse because I refused to be quiet about it. You weren't a teacher, you are a gatekeeper. And tonight proves I was right to push back. For the first time in my life, Mr. Roberts looked small. Not intimidating, not powerful, just small. The crowd started clapping. Not polite applause, real, booming, sustained clapping that filled the room. Some people cheered, others nodded in agreement. But then, something unexpected happened. A voice cut through the applause. "She's lying," Mr. Roberts said, but his voice was low now, almost trembling. His eyes darted around the crowd. "You all don't understand. You don't know what she did." The room froze again. My stomach dropped. "What did I do?" I asked, my throat dry. He turned his gaze on me, and there was something wild in his eyes now, something desperate. "You never told them the truth." His lips twisted into something between a smirk and a snarl. "You never told them how far you were willing to go to get what you wanted." The applause faltered, people shifted uneasily, and in that horrible, heavy silence, I realized something terrifying. He wasn't done. He was about to drag me down with him, and the next words out of his mouth would change everything. The room was too quiet. It felt like every breath, every heartbeat, every flicker of movement had stopped, waiting for Mr. Roberts to open his mouth again. He was sweating now, his shirt sticking to his chest, his tie crooked. His eyes weren't steady. They darted between me, the curator, the critic, and the restless audience. For years, I had been the one trembling under his gaze, waiting for his cutting remarks. But now it was him who looked cornered, and yet his desperation made him dangerous. "You think she's some kind of prodigy?" he spat, his voice cracking at the edges. "You think this little accident of hers belongs here, in this gallery? You don't know the half of it." My pulse hammered in my ears. "What are you talking about?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. He smiled then, sharp, bitter, ugly. "Tell them. Go on. Tell them how you cheated." A ripple of gasps spread through the crowd. "I didn't cheat," I said, my voice trembling but firm, but he bulldozed over me. "You traced, you copied, you stole ideas. That's all you've ever done. Take what isn't yours and parade it around like it's original." The words hit me like blows, not because they were true, but because of how convincing his voice sounded when he said them. The crowd leaned in, hungry for drama. Whispers rippled. Could it be true? Did she copy? "I didn't steal anything," I said, louder, forcing the quiver out of my throat. "Everything I made came from me." But he didn't stop. His words turned darker. "She begged me to help her once, didn't she? She came to me after class, crying, saying she couldn't keep up, that she wasn't good enough. And he pressed a hand to his chest as if he was the victim. "I told her the truth, that she didn't have it. And now she pretends I was cruel to her. Now she plays the victim." The room swayed. He was rewriting the past right in front of me, twisting it so that his cruelty became my weakness. "You're lying," I said, my voice steadying as anger rose inside me. "I never asked for your help. I never needed it. What I needed was for you to stop tearing me down every chance you got." "Convenient," he snapped back. "That's what you'd say now, with all these people here to applaud you. But I know the truth." The critic with the red lipstick crossed her arms, her voice slicing through the tension. "Do you have proof of these accusations, Mr. Roberts? Because right now, all I see is a bitter man trying to tear down the very student he failed to nurture." The crowd murmured in agreement. The curator's face was stony. My legs felt like they might give out, but I stood tall. And then, something shifted. Mr. Roberts' face contorted, his calm snapping like glass under pressure. He pointed at me, his finger trembling. He shouted, "She ruined me," his voice booming through the gallery. "Do you hear me? She ruined my career, my reputation. I gave my life to teaching, and she turned me into a villain just because she wouldn't coddle her." Gasps echoed. Someone said, "This is madness." Another, "He's lost it." And then he lurched forward. For a split second, I thought he might actually attack me, right there in front of everyone. My stomach twisted with fear. Security moved, the curator raised a hand, the critic stiffened. But he stopped halfway, breathing like he run a mile. His voice dropped, hoarse and ragged. "You don't deserve this," he said, his eyes locked on mine. "None of this belongs to you, and I'll prove it." The threat hung in the air like a guillotine. Security took him by the arms then, pulling him back as he kicked and shouted, his words dissolving into furious noise. "Fraud! Cheater! She doesn't deserve it! She doesn't deserve anything!" The crowd erupted, some in outrage, some in sympathy, some just hungry for the scandal. And as they dragged him out of the gallery, his eyes never left mine. There was something in them. Not just anger, but a promise. A vow. I stood frozen, my heart rattling against my ribs. Because I knew this wasn't over. Mr. Roberts wasn't done with me. Not by a long shot. When the gallery finally quieted down, I felt like I had been standing at the edge of a cliff for hours. The air was still heavy with whispers, like smoke refusing to clear. The curator tried to calm people with reassurances. "We apologize for the disruption, but the art will always speak louder than anger." But the damage was already done. My work still hung on the wall. People were still looking at it, but the energy was different. Before, it had been awe. curiosity, even admiration. Now it was laced with doubt, with suspicion, with the echo of Mr. Roberts' voice shouting, "Fraud!" I left the spotlight as quickly as I could. A few strangers offered pats on the shoulder or words of encouragement. Others gave me looks that said, "We're not so sure." My stomach twisted. I wanted to disappear. But instead, I went home. And that's when things got worse. The first email came the next morning. Subject line, cheater. Inside, only one sentence. "You'll never deserve this." I deleted it, telling myself it was some random troll who had read about the outburst in the gallery. But then another came, and another. By the end of the week, I had 20 different email addresses all spewing the same poison. Some called me a thief, others said I'd destroyed a man's life. And then one email ended with, "I know where you live." I froze. My finger hovered over the trackpad, the words blurred. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house felt like footsteps. Every shadow stretched too long. The next day, I went to the cafe down the street, hoping to get out of my head. I sat in the corner, nursing a coffee that had gone cold, when I saw him, Mr. Roberts, sitting 2 tables over reading a newspaper like it was the most normal thing in the world. His presence made my skin crawl. For a moment, I thought maybe it was coincidence. Maybe he always came here. But then he looked up, folded the paper, and smiled. Not a friendly smile, a knowing one. I left without finishing my coffee. My hand shook the whole way home. By the end of that week, I was seeing him everywhere. Outside the grocery store, across the street from my apartment, even once at the park when I was walking home late. He never came close, never spoke, just watched. And then the letter arrived. Not an email. A handwritten letter slipped under my door. The handwriting was sharp, angry, pressed into the paper so hard it almost tore. "You think you've won. You think the gallery means you're free of me. But I made you. Without me, you're nothing. And I'm not going anywhere until everyone knows the truth." I sat on the floor, clutching the paper, my whole body trembling. The words replayed in my head. "I made you." For years, he had told me I wasn't good enough, that I didn't belong, that I was a failure. And now, even with my art hanging in the biggest gallery in the country, he still had power over me. But then something shifted inside me. I remembered the look on people's faces when they saw my work, the critics' words, "This is raw, unfiltered, and unforgettable." The strangers who had stood in silence, moved by something I created. That was real. His control over me was the lie. The fear began to harden into anger. I took the letter, folded it carefully, and put it in a drawer. Then I sat at my desk and began to draw. Not because I had to, not because anyone expected me to, but because I wanted to. Every line on the page was defiance. Every stroke was refusal to let him rewrite my story again. But even as I poured myself into the art, even as the anger steadied my shaking hands, one truth gnawed at the edges of my mind. He wasn't finished. I knew it in the pit of my stomach. Somewhere out there, Mr. Roberts was planning his next move. And the scariest part was, I didn't know what it would be, but I knew it would come. And when it did, everything, my work, my future, maybe even my safety, would be hanging by a thread. Weeks passed. I tried to drown myself in art, in routine, in anything that kept my mind from circling back to him. The email stopped. The letters stopped. I started to believe maybe, just maybe, Mr. Roberts had finally given up. Then the gallery called. "Congratulations," the director said over the phone, her voice bright. "We'd like to offer you a solo exhibition next spring. A full floor, entirely yours." My chest tightened with disbelief. A solo show, the kind of opportunity artists dreamed about their entire lives. For the first time in years, I let myself feel proud. On opening night, I walked into the gallery, my pieces spread across the room like fragments of my soul. The lights were soft, the air filled with the low hum of people talking, cameras flashed. I felt free. Until I saw the plaque. It was small, sitting just below the title of my collection, and it didn't have my name. It read, "Curated by Robert Daniels." My blood ran cold. I spun around, scanning the crowd, and there he was, standing by the far wall, drink in hand, smiling that same smug smile, like he'd been there all along, waiting for me to finally feel safe again before pulling the ground out from under me. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. He hadn't just tried to ruin me. He had found a way back into my story to tie his name to mine forever, whether I liked it or not.